Okay, in this relatively short PowerPoint, I'm going to be talking about your major project paper and presentation and giving you some pointers on what you need to make sure you're including. So first of all, please make note of the fact that there are 4 sections to your major project paper, and you're going to want to pay very careful attention to the page limits, the formatting requirements, and the expectations for each section. Now, all of the information that I'm going to talk about in this PowerPoint is also available to you on our D2L site under syllabus, under the course activities. So you can read at your leisure and make sure that you're doing everything that you need to do. So the very first section is the executive summary and recommendations. This cannot be more than 3 pages long. It's the first thing that appears after your table of contents. You start with an executive summary, which is sort of like an abstract. It's a paragraph or 2 long, basically captures for the reader what it is that you've done in this audit. You follow that with your 2 to 3 practical, and the emphasis is on practical here, recommendations. I not only want to see what your recommendation is, but what you believe it will take in order for your organization to implement that recommendation. And then also why each of your recommendations makes good sense. Imagine that you are trying to sell these recommendations to the organization itself. What might be some of the issues that they would raise if you were talking to the top folks? What would they say would facilitate or get in the way of them actually achieving these recommendations? I want you to have given all of that some careful thought. Also, make note of the fact that your recommendations need to flow from your sustainability audit. This is not a class in how to create a green energy team or anything remotely like that. So please, don't go down that route in terms of your recommendations. Your recommendations need to focus on things like structure, on reward systems, on leadership, etc. The things that we've talked about in this class, the macro level content subject areas that really make it possible for top leaders to lead a sustainable organization. Again, make sure your recommendations flow from your audit. The audit is the second part of your paper. It can't be more than 17 pages long. It has to be organized by each of the sustainability and action units. Please use headers, labels if you will. And make sure that on every page as you're writing, you've got at least 2 to 3 paragraphs, okay? But focus on, okay, Unit 1, what's our analysis? Unit 2, what's the analysis? Don't summarize. I'll have more to say on that in just a bit. This second part, the sustainability audit, is an analysis. You're graduate level students, and this is where it's very important for you to deliver graduate level work. You are not summarizing or describing the data that you gathered in your sustainability and action units. Instead, you are analyzing that data. So don't simply engage in summarizing. Don't simply engage in description. Instead, try to analyze and evaluate the data that you've gathered. In order to do that, you can compare and contrast. So what does the theory say? What did you actually observe in your organization? What's happening in your organization? What's happening in another organization that's similar to yours? What's happening in your organization now? How does that compare and contrast to what was happening in your organization in the past? In terms of evaluating and judging, when you're looking at what your organization is doing, is it good? Is it not so good? Does it seem right? Does it seem not so right? What theory or what model or whatever have we talked about this semester that could help you judge whether something is good or bad for the organization if it wants to be sustainable? And then interpreting, what is the information that you gathered? What does it mean? How does it all fit together? Again, notice that we're really steering away from summarizing and describing. Imagine that you're standing in front of the executive board and they've given you all kinds of data, and now what they want to hear from you is, tell us what it means. Tell us what we can do with this data. Don't tell us the data again. We get that. Now we want to understand, well, does this mean that we're on the right track? Does it mean that we have a ways to go? What are some things that we should be thinking about, etc.? Ultimately, you need to be making a judgment call as you're working your way through this part of the paper. What does the organization's history suggest? Is the organization, for example, using the right effectiveness criteria? Are they doing things that make sense given their current structure? What would it take for them to move away from that structure? What are the problems caused by their current structure? So, in the sustainability and action units, you would have said, okay, well, here's what their structure looks like. Okay, well, what are some of the issues that are caused by the structure that they have? Is the organization doing anything about the issues that are a function of that structure? Are they doing a good job managing that structure? And then finally on this page, as it says, is the organization's focus on sustainability effective, given its stakeholders, given its strategy, given its structure, given its culture? So keeping all of that in mind, are they in fact on the right track? After you do your draft, I want you to go back and read each paragraph that you've written and ask yourself if the narrative in that paragraph answers this, what I call the so what question. So you've written this paragraph to someone who is, again, imagine someone sitting on the executive board. If they said, so what? Okay. Does your paragraph answer that question? So here the example. Let's say you've written a lovely paragraph describing how your organization assesses its stakeholder management. You've said the organization does this, and it does that, and it does this. Well, the executive board person says, so what? So what? Yeah, I get how we're doing it. What I want to know is, do you think that's good for this organization or not? Is there some way that we could improve? What should we be doing? Why should we be doing it? That's what your writing should consist of in this section. Whatever you do, do not simply reiterate or rewrite what you wrote in response to the sustainability and action units. The paper is not your opportunity to just take that data that's in bullet points and turn it into sentences. The third section, this is your references. I want you to use APA documentation style. I have a nice PDF document on our D2L site under syllabus that clarifies precisely what that style is. Please make sure you use that. Also note that your final paper has to include at least 10 distinct references or sources. You can use the text for this class. You can use the articles that I've posted to the various discussion boards over the course of the semester. Those are all fair game. But keep in mind that no fewer than 4 of your sources must be from peer-reviewed academic journals. This is where you need to use your university library. Now again, you're all at different universities, and the way that you access your library resources, and you can do this electronically, you do not have to be physically in your university's library, obviously. It varies by the library. So what works at the UW Green Bay Library might not be the same at the UW Superior Library. So if you haven't had a chance to explore the library yet, well, first of all, I would say shame on you if you're a graduate student. But secondly, I would say you need to hurry up and get a hold of the folks there and start talking to them about what's the best way for you to find the kinds of journal articles that you can use for this paper. Now, you're not going to go into the journal search areas of the library and type in the name of your company. That's not the kind of information you need to include in your paper. Instead, remember what you're doing. You're analyzing and evaluating what your organization is doing. Well, you can find peer-reviewed professional journal articles that talk about whether, for example, things like travel light, and don't use that jargon, but temporary contract workers. What are some of the pros and cons associated with that? What are some of the pros and cons associated with 360-degree performance appraisals? What are some of the pros and cons associated with different structural models? What are some of the pros and cons associated with different talent management approaches? There is a ton of information, and I expect to see you find it and incorporate it into your paper. Please note that 10 citations is the floor, and when I say citations, I am not talking about you found something at a URL out on the web. That's not a citation. That doesn't count. You're doing an academic paper. So you need to, again, find good articles. 10 citations, as I said, is the floor. That's the bare minimum. That's C-level work. You want to get an A-level work, you're talking about a minimum of 20 citations. And that's really a non-negotiable number. Typically, you should be able to find, frankly, many, many more. The fourth section, these are your appendices. This is where you will put your updated sustainability and action units. So if I made comments on what you submitted for your progress report and said, you know, you need to address this in more detail, you need to provide examples, you need to do, you know, whatever I said, I expect you to have fixed for the final version of your paper. If you've discovered additional information since you submitted your report, I expect to see that in there as well. So Appendix A is the updated, the freshened sustainability and action units. Again, as I told you previously, those unit questions should be addressed using bullets rather than narrative. You want to make sure that the questions appear before the answers. It needs to be crystal clear to both me and to you exactly which questions you're answering. Also, keep everything in the exact same order that it was provided to you. There's a reason for that order, an organizational approach, something that helps us build toward the end of the paper that makes the most sense. So please keep things in that order. Now, in some cases, it may be true that a particular question does not apply. For example, some of you, your organizations don't have boards. And so, you know, a question asking about board committees is irrelevant. You don't just skip it though. You need to tell me explicitly why the question does not apply. So, for example, if your organization doesn't have a board, then I would expect to see that explanation. This organization does not have a board of directors or anything like that. Therefore, there's nothing to talk about in terms of its function, its composition, or its committees. Any other additional appendices that you want to include, that's great. They could be anything that you've looked at that tells you about your organization. For those of you who have a publicly traded organization, it could be the narrative portion of the organization's 10K, whatever tables or exhibits, graphs, whatever you may have found. The formatting. Make sure you follow the formatting. Double-spaced, pages numbered, 1-inch margins all around, 12-point Times New Roman. This is the sort of thing that when students fail to observe formatting requirements, my response will be to turn it right back to you and say, fix it. And at that point, it will be harder for me to give you the best possible grade, because this is sort of a baseline expectation. When a client has an expectation about what a deliverable is going to look like, you don't not follow the client's expectations. And in this case, I'm your client. So please follow my expectations. The length of the first two major sections, as it says, should be no more than 20 pages. Beyond that, you have room for your cover page, table of contents, your references, and your appendices. The paper's due no later than May 4th at 11:59, and you will submit it to Dropbox. How's it going to be graded? This is all right in the syllabus online, and you'll see it's very consistent with everything that I've just said. It talks about using evidence, it talks about using analysis, it talks about including examples and references, it talks about how many of those at minimum have to be peer-reviewed citation, it talks about organization and formatting. The project presentation you can do using PowerPoint, Prezi, Slide Rocket, I don't care, whatever, as long as we can all view your presentation. Please keep your presentation to between 20 and 25 slides, no more or less, not including the cover slide, primarily because it will make it more straightforward for everyone else in the class to review your presentation. When you're creating the presentation, please don't have any text smaller than 18-point font on any page. It will be just simply too hard to read, and at that point you probably just have, frankly, way too much stuff on your slide. Try to make your presentation aesthetically pleasing. It needs to be professional. Creative is always nice. Make sure the information is substantive. Don't write in sentences. It is a PowerPoint or some other form of presentation. So you need to provide enough information that people can understand what you're trying to say without you doing a narration. So you're not doing a narration for this presentation, and they need to be able to understand while watching it in slideshow mode. So it won't do any good to include additional information in the notes section of the slides. Whatever you want to communicate needs to be communicated very simply on the slide. Make sure you go over your recommendations, and then at a very high level review your analyses. So you're not going to be obviously going over every sustainability and action question. Do not include your references. If people are really interested in seeing your references, they can ask you for that information offline. And this you need to post to the discussion board, notice not to the Dropbox, by April 26th, because that's where everybody will review your hard work. Thanks very much.